As I crossed the busy road, I saw approaching from a perpendicular angle what appeared at first to be one of the drug-taking beggars who roam the city, scanning the streets for half-smoked cigarettes in austere majesty. A quite young, haggard-looking fellow, wearing an unsalvageable linen suit and an Afghan shepherd's woolen hat, now shuffled towards me down the pavement, as though he were in a sort of mystic trance, growing more delighted with each heavy step. It was only at the moment that he stormed into a grocer's shop and loudly demanded to be sold a packet of black market Egyptian cigarettes that I recognised the figure to be Rory Stewart himself, whose work I've admired since I was a boy of 11. Having violated Egyptian social graces and frightening an old woman, Rory was thrown by the shopkeeper's apprentice onto the pavement of the lively commercial street. "Have one of mine, they're Bulgarian." I bent down to offer him one of my cigarettes as he rested his feet on the pavement. He took two and we smoked together ceremoniously. We spoke for some time and no subject was left undiscussed. Once a certain level of mutual respect had been established, he informed me that he was on his way to a hashish den in the neighbourhood. He asked me to assist him in reaching that destination and made it clear that he was in a rather generous mood. We began our on-foot journey in tremendous spirits. Our ambition was to reach the northern extremity of West London's vast Arab quarter before the hashish den closed for its afternoon hiatus, when the owners sit and drink Moroccan tea. Rory and I strolled through the bustling labyrinth of streets, our arms locked in a friendly chain. We engaged in a series of marvellous interactions with jolly men who we greeted on our way. Rory proved himself to be well versed in many Oriental languages, which in fact proved rather crucial when the flint on our only lighter snapped. The hashish den was disguised as a private backgammon club. We were buzzed through the door and up the stairs, where we passed through a modest lounge area to a glass cabinet, behind which the owners were sitting. It contained the most exquisite pieces of hashish I had ever seen. I marvelled at the sparkling brown lumps, pressed into a variety of forms. Rory then handed me a big wad of cash and told me to pick one to crack on with while he used the lavatory. I reclined by myself in one corner of the room and smoked the hashish in an elated state. In the time I had waited for Rory to come back out, I had arranged the backgammon counters on the table into a geometric design. Eventually the owners asked me to leave in a coarse fashion. Their afternoon period of relaxation had now arrived. They went to evict Rory from the lavatory as well. He had been in there so long that I had totally forgotten about him. After knocking on the door with rising impatience, the owners finally barged in, breaking the lock, to find Rory Stewart, the young parliamentarian, propped up on the toilet, with his face pressed against the cubicle wall, unconscious, with an ejectable needle sticking out of his forearm. The gruff owners of the hashish den grabbed him, dragged his limp body across the room, and threw the poor chap down the stairs. I rushed down behind him and carried him out of the door. On the pavement, I used Rory's pashmina to wipe the blood now streaming down his face. And, smoking a cigarette he'd picked up from the floor, he said to me quite seriously, "I know a place we can carry on the party." It was then I became first aware of this man's colossal stamina. Without giving away a single detail about the party, Rory summoned a taxi. We packed into the back of the cab and then began to navigate our way through the disordered city. It was soon apparent that our driver was indeed an Afghan, and so Rory began to tell us both on good authority about the recent political history of that country, and he showcased precise and colourful background knowledge about every facet of Afghan life. But Rory's wonderful descriptions of his homeland caused the driver to become so overwhelmed with sadness that the poor chap started weeping for the duration of our journey. As our driver unravelled with emotion, I was quite struck at how unmoved Rory seemed, gazing out of the window with unaffected neutrality, while our driver purred his heart out, painting with words a series of powerful scenes about his timeless yet troublesome childhood. We arrived at our intended destination, a palatial home in Kensington, guarded by security personnel and surrounded by pristine hedging. We approached the entrance and I read the brass plaque beside us, embossed proudly with the lettering, Embassy of the Republic of Yemen. At the threshold of the embassy, Rory warned me quite earnestly that if I'm offered some cart to chew, that I must accept it, or else they'll say I'm like a woman and they won't respect me. Before I had an opportunity to object, the grand doors of the embassy opened slowly, and an impeccably dressed man with gelled hair greeted us with tremendous warmth. "Rory, welcome, come in." He then hugged us and kissed us both 4 times on each cheek, and invited us to follow him up the marble staircase and be received by the ambassador in his office. We ascended past glorious paintings of red-coated British statesmen posing in colonial triumph, the captivating beat of the drum drawing us closer with each step. As the doors of the ambassador's office were pulled open for us, I couldn't fathom what I saw before me. This terribly grand Regency-era study, in all of its imperial splendour, was filled with 24 or so Yemeni diplomats, each one in a state of sheer ecstasy from chewing so much cart, dancing together in a big circle around the ambassador's desk and swaying their heads along to the frantic rhythm of the music. The doors closed behind us and immediately we were called over to dance beside the ambassador himself, who kissed us both 4 times on each cheek and passed us each a dry, leafy bundle of card. Feeling honoured, we chewed the card and copied the manner in which our hosts danced. Hours passed and the afternoon floated away. The room had become like an oven, with a thick cloud of cigarette smoke hanging in the air. Rory the diplomats and I continued to dance feverishly. The cart seemed to provide each one of us with an unending store of energy, while depriving us of our sanity. From across the room, I noticed Rory Stewart injecting his penis with opium. However, when I glanced over a second time, I spotted that the penis he was injecting, in fact, belonged to the Yemeni ambassador himself. Fortunately for us, he had chewed so much card that he didn't realise at all, and he kept dancing in blissful ignorance, with the needle dangling rhythmically between his legs. So I made my way carefully across the room and suggested to Rory that we say our goodbyes and evacuate the embassy before any of the Yemenis got wise. Until late into the night we promenaded around Hyde Park and talked about all manner of things, and we forged a deep connection, I think. Rory beguiled me with spellbinding tales of forgotten lands. He told me his detailed solution for dividing Iran along ethno-religious contingencies. He told me that if I ever got myself into a spot of bog, that they would take care of me at MI5 if I mention his name. Rory then opened up to me about his miserable childhood, and how he had a wretched time of his boarding school education. told me how, as a boy, he developed an obsession with Sir Richard Francis Burton, who he once idolised like a father. The Orientalist and explorer, he said, had been an inspiration to him throughout his youth. So much so that at the age of 19, Rory followed in his hero's footsteps and embarked on a journey across Afghanistan to find the worlds that Burton had described in the books Rory adored as a boy. On a bench in Hyde Park, in a moment of great tenderness, Rory confessed to me that during his journey through Afghanistan, he was crossing a barren valley with 3 shepherd guides, 2,500 miles above sea level. They were a 5 days' walk away from the nearest settlement, camping on the ridge of a cliff face one night. Rory said that he was having the most wonderful evening of his life, drinking Afghan tea, listening to the shepherds singing their mountain songs, gazing up at the stars in the clear night sky, and watching the flames flicker beautifully in the campfire. Rory was the happiest he had ever felt. That night, miles from any sort of plumbing whatsoever, Rory went to use an area behind a boulder as his makeshift lavatory. Squatting behind this boulder, with his eyes still fixed at the stars, Rory was suddenly grabbed and pinned down by the 3 shepherds, who then told Rory to eat his own feces hot off the ground, or they would throw him off the cliff to his death. Following Rory's compliance with their twisted demands, the shepherds returned to the campsite, cackling as they went. Rory got up and went to join them some time later. A young, humiliated Rory heard them still in a hoot of laughter as he approached, and arrived to see his boyhood copy of Burton's travel diaries burning on the campfire. Rory then spent the next 6 weeks smoking opium at a remote petrol station in the foothills of the Khyber Valley, where he suffered a nervous breakdown. We paused for a moment to reflect on man's capacity for cruelty. Then 2 young Saudi princes who recognised Rory from a bash stopped for a bit of a chin wag and invited us to join them for a lavished feast that they were attending. We of course accepted the invitation gracefully. We were soon picked up near Marble Arch in a fluorescent yellow 4x4 with blackened windows. In the back seats, they poured generous helpings of Russian vodka down our throats as we drove through the nocturnal city. Personally, I found 2 Saudi fellows to be rather brash. During the journey, one of them struck poor Rory across the face when he dropped his lit cigarette on the upholstery. Then a moment later they were laughing together like old chums. Blind drunk, Rory and I opened the doors of the back seats and found ourselves in a cavernous, brightly lit, subterranean parking area, with row upon row of sports cars and luxury 4x4s that Rory and I were careful not to drunkenly stumble into as we made our way across the cold concrete space. We were then taken through a door and across a fabulously lively kitchen where dozens of chefs were preparing a tremendous feast. Rory and I were careful, in our intoxicated state, not to get in their way, as our hosts led us into the drinks room, where we were both invited to select a bottle from the cabinet. Feeling quite timid, I chose a rare tequila and then turned around to see that one of the Saudi chaps had laid out 4 snowy lines of white powder on a silver plate. I asked what on earth it was, and Rory proclaimed enthusiastically, "Captagon!" He then took me aside and told me rather menacingly that if I refused to partake, they would chop me up and put me in a sports equipment satchel. I had no way of determining whether this was intended as some sort of cruel joke, The delusional fear of a man at the end of his tether, or the harsh reality? The Captagon turned me berserk, and I felt unstoppable. We were instructed by our hosts to grab some more bottles and make our way up to the party. We entered a lift adjacent to the drinks room, and we spent what felt like a lifetime ascending to our level. In the mirror, my reflection caused me to feel immense revulsion, and my frenzied mind became certain that we would be fed our own feces or face death once we reached the top floor. As my claustrophobia reached unparalleled heights, the doors of the lift finally opened, putting an end to the torture. Unfortunately for the sake of this account, those pushy little buggers press-ganged me into signing a non-disclosure agreement, kept in the drinks room, and so I cannot reveal who was involved in what I witnessed before me. But a large number of anonymous Saudi princes, dressed both in traditional robes as well as the latest designer brands, had invited the most senior statesmen in British politics over to their extravagant penthouse for an enormous party to celebrate the safe return of 3 Islamic State or Daesh fighters. It was fabulously wild, and everybody was satisfying their most base desires. Young slave girls, whom I was told had been imported from Syria especially for the occasion, danced for the entertainment of the intoxicated guests, and prepared generous lines of Captagon for them to snort. The indulgent princes were pouring Russian vodka from enormous bottles down the throats of the open-mouthed politicians, and then howling with laughter when they vomited all over themselves and retched. The 3 guests of honour, the Daesh fighters, were sitting triumphantly on a sofa and being congratulated with humility by the distinguished British guests, and Rory insisted that he and I do likewise, or else risk being thrown off the balcony. This time I knew he meant what he said. After performing my duty, I decided to explore the house for a while. The party had gotten more crowded and even more animalistic, and I needed some semblance of rationality. Just on the periphery of the main dance floor area, I noticed a row of 3 ancient statuettes that were on display. One of the more worldly princes, who spotted me marvelling at the stunning objects, came over and proudly informed me that they were in fact highly prized Assyrian artifacts dating back more than 4,000 years, depicting demigod warrior kings who were worshipped in proto-theistic ceremonies before battle, in a time so long ago that one couldn't possibly comprehend it. I stood and admired the figures for some time, in awe of the majesty of these great historic relics, before continuing on my aimless tour of the penthouse. After a dreadfully embarrassing meander through the women's section, an area from which I was clearly most unwelcome, I headed back to the party, which was turning into a frenzied madhouse. Rory saw me approaching the party zone and slowly danced over towards me, paying no attention to his surroundings. With his outstretched arms swaying from side to side, and his hips shaking to the rhythm of the music, Rory then slipped on a discarded blue necktie on the floor, which caused the stupendously intoxicated young parliamentarian to fall crashing into the 3 Assyrian statuettes, totally destroying them. In that moment I regrettably decided to abandon Rory, before anybody set eyes on the destruction he was laying in. I used the grit left over in a small coffee cup to paint my face brown, and then I put on a pair of designer sunglasses and an expensive gilet, and left the party disguised as a Saudi prince. On my way down from the penthouse, I thought I must help Rory, so I got into a taxi and asked to go to MI5, hoping they could rescue him from this predicament. The driver then said, in an East London dialect, You're already here, mate.